Yeah, okay. All right.
Good morning, Commissioner Fielder. Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Commissioner O'Donnell. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, let's get started. Good morning. Time is now 8 a.m. Today's date is Tuesday, July 26, 2022. It's the time and place for our regularly scheduled business meeting. I would ask the other commissioners to join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, commissioners. I would announce that we have quorum this morning. Vice President Johnson, myself, and Commissioner Pinocci are present in the Bollinger Room. Commissioners O'Donnell and Fielder are participating virtually. We do have quorum. Is there public comment this morning? Public comment from the room? Seeing none. Is there any public comment online? Seeing none. All right. There are no changes to the agenda this morning. So we will move straight into our action items. Action item number 1 is approval of the commission minutes for the week of July 12, 2022. Vice President Johnson.
Mr. President, move we approve those minutes.
That has been moved and seconded by Commissioner Pinocci. Is there discussion on the minutes from July 12, 2022 or any changes? Seeing none, all those in favor of the Vice President's motion to adopt the commission minutes for the week of July 12, 2022 as drafted, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, minutes are adopted. All right, let's move into our work session then. Making good time this morning. Item number 1 is docket 2022.07.075. This is Abaco Energy Services LLC. It's an interim order decision. The commission here is here to make a decision to grant or deny the interim order request. Good morning, Cassandra.
Good morning, President.
Can you pull the mic closer? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, President and Commissioners. On July 1st, 2022, Abeco Energy Services filed their application for a propane supply rate adjustment for the tracker period June 1st, 2022. Abeco requests the commission issue an interim order approving the rates requested on their application. Abeco proposes to increase the natural supply rates from
Sorry, can you speak up, please?
Yes. Abaco proposes to increase the natural gas supply rates from 0.94 per USG to 1.5356 per USG for the period of June 1st, 2022 to September 30th, 2022. From 0.9825 per USG to 1.5356 per USG for the tracker period October 1st through March 31st, 2023. From 0.925 to 1.4406 per USG for the tracker period April 1st, 2023 to May 31st, 2023. This application also requests approval to recover the under collected balance of $4,455.13 in the propane supply cost account for the period ending June 30th, 2022 at a rate of 0.0056 per USG, which is reflected in the rates previously mentioned. This is an interim order and staff recommends approval.
Thank you. I will move to approve or grant the interim order as drafted by staff. I will have a question for you once we get into that discussion. Is there a second?
Second motion, Mr. President.
Okay, my motion has been seconded. Discussion. Cassandra, I noticed that the application filed by Abaco sought a rate adjustment, interim rate adjustment to be effective June 1st, 2022. But I noticed that the proposed draft order from the commission would make the interim order effective for services rendered on or after August 1st, 2022. So can you describe why the commission is going to move forward with the August 1st, 2022 date as opposed to the date requested by Abaco?
So the commission has not in practice backdated rate increases. So what would occur is the difference that would be under collected would be collected next year in their under collection. So typically we don't approve rates that are backdated. We typically go forward, and they did not file their application until July 1st. So.
Okay, additional discussion or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of my motion to approve the interim order as drafted, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, my motion carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, let's move to work session item number 2. This is pipeline safety rulemaking. This commission initiated to consider a draft notice of proposed rulemaking to update the incorporation of federal safety regulations. Mr. Hamilton.
Good morning, Mr. President and members of the commission. This rulemaking is an annual process for the commission to come into compliance with the most recently adopted federal regulations that govern the safety requirements of our pipeline safety program. It's typically done later in the year than this. However, the last Montana legislature passed a bill that actually established a moratorium on adoption notices for rulemaking beginning October 1. And as a result of that statute, we are moving up the adoption of the current federal regulations. It does mean that instead of capturing everything through the end of October, we are only capturing everything through August 5th, which is the latest date that we can include in this particular rulemaking based on the notice's proposed publication date of August 5th. So in consultation with our pipeline safety program manager, Mr. Tierney, this was the preference rather than waiting until the new year, until after that moratorium lifts. So staff would recommend that the commission authorize the draft notice of proposed rulemaking in your materials and authorize staff to make other changes that may be required by the Secretary of State for publication. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Tierney, did you want to weigh in? He waves off. Is there a motion? Commissioner Panoche?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we adopt staff recommendations.
Second motion, Mr. President.
Motion's been moved and seconded. Discussion?
Mr. President.
Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Hamilton, so in this particular year now, we'll be using a partial year's worth of information. Is that for this year only? Will we then going forward be able, even though we're straddling, I guess, fiscal years, we'll be able to look at a 12-month record from this point forward?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, that's correct. In future years, we won't necessarily be limited by that October 1 moratorium. I should note, though, that under current law is effective each year that the year preceding a session of the legislature. So it's possible that the legislature could repeal that statute, and then we would never have to deal with this moratorium again. We'd always be looking at a full 12-month period to capture.
Follow up, Mr. President.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. President. What I'm asking, so we've got, I don't know, what, 3 months or whatever here that we're not going to be able to look at. Can those be looked at next year in conjunction with the 9 months that if we still were looking at the deadline at the 9 months up to the October?
Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Additional questions or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Commissioner Panoche's motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Let's move to work session item number 3. This is docket 2021.09.112 Northwestern Energy. This is Northwestern's annual PCAM adjustment. We're here to consider a draft final order. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Commissioners, in your meeting materials, you have a draft final order resolving the PCAM docket for Northwestern Energy. This is their annual PCAM filing where they're seeking a true up of their under and over collections from the prior year. In this particular PCAM docket, Northwestern also proposed 2 items that were contested by the Montana Consumer Council. Those included a forecast of demand side management expenditures over the coming years, and also a proposal to institute a fixed price off-system hedging program. So you'll recall that the commission held a hearing on this where MCC and Northwestern Energy presented evidence and argument on behalf of their respective positions. After that hearing, we did receive a proposed final order from Northwestern Energy and a brief from the Montana Consumer Council. Both of those should be in your meeting materials. Staff's recommendation, as reflected in the draft final order, is to grant Northwestern's requests on both of the contested issues, in addition to granting the true up of their regular PCAM adjustment. I'd like to call the commission's attention to the order portion of the draft final order, which begins on page 8 and carries on to page 9. Specifically, paragraphs 31 and 32 are important in my estimation because 31 establishes the sideboards of the hedging program as approved by, or that may be approved by the commission if you approve the draft final order. This formally requires Northwestern to follow the limitations that they said that they would be imposing upon themselves as part of this hedging program. I'd also refer you to paragraph 32, which establishes some reporting requirements for Northwestern Energy. I would note this is different from what Northwestern Energy requested as part of its draft final order, its proposed final order in this matter, but it does establish some of the metrics that the commission would be, the commission staff at least believes are relevant to evaluating the effectiveness and the success of this program going forward. So we would ask that the commission approve the draft final order, which includes both the sort of ring fencing around the hedging program and the reporting requirements so that we can have information going forward to evaluate how this program is working. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. I'd also note that we have from regulatory, Mr. Fink, and I believe, Neil, Mr. Templeton is also in the back if you have other questions.
Mr. Fink, do you have anything to offer? Gilberton, anything? All right. Is there a motion, Vice President Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would move that we approve the draft final order from staff. And if there's a second to that motion, I would request an opportunity to briefly comment.
I'll second that motion.
All right, Commissioner Fielder has seconded. Vice President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to speak specifically to the element in the order that deals with this concept of hedging. Coming from an agricultural background and having some experience in marketing those commodities, I can tell you that the concept of hedging is not something new or some wild concept, especially when it is structured as carefully as this one is. I think the sideboards and the reporting requirements are more than adequate to allow adoption of this policy for Northwestern to accomplish its goal. I had and this is really what the hedging concept to me is all about. I had a ag economics professor in school who told us when it came to marketing, we needed to understand the difference between the most and enough. And hedging is a tool that will, especially in this volatile energy market, allow the utility to lock in some prices that may not ultimately be the lowest, but it also, in all likelihood, will protect consumers from not being exposed to the highest. So we're in that enough instead of the most territory there. I think it's a tool that we ought to let Northwestern try out and see if we can have some success in behalf of the ratepayers with the implementation of that, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Commissioner Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. President. And well said. I concur with the Vice President's comments. I did work with staff on this order, and I spent a good deal of my own time doing some research and talking to people within the industry, actually disinterested parties that are retired from the industry, not affiliated with the applicant in any way or any of the parties of this proceeding. But basically what this comes down to is we are going to allow Northwestern to forecast ahead into what is their load, what are their resources, and where are they anticipating they're going to fall short, and then allowing them to cover those shortages by pre-purchasing or making rate agreements in advance, so we don't see these heavy price spikes. So this, I think, is a very important tool to prevent extreme spikes in pricing during those peak demand times when we have extreme cold weather events and extreme hot weather events. This is going to help smooth out the cost to consumers. I think that the sideboards that are put into this through paragraph 31, 32, and also 33 are really important. And I think this is very much different than what the commission has allowed in the past with the more wide open hedging and speculative trading. This is geared specifically to the load resource by month based on real data. And I believe this is going to be a lot safer and more secure way to keep prices from experiencing these dramatic spikes than what we have now, which is basically where our customers or the customers in Northwestern, the ratepayers, are subject to those extreme price spikes, and there's no control over that really right now. So I think this is going to fill in the gaps and help keep the rates flat. And to not do this, I think, would be a lot riskier than doing it. I think that we've really mitigated the risk here, the way the staff has crafted this order and the reporting and the sideboards that are in it. So I'm going to support the motion, and I think it's really important to allow Northwestern to start using this tool as soon as possible.
Thank you, Commissioner Fielder. Commissioner Pinochi.
Thank you, Mr. President. Couple of questions for staff. This is gambling. Let's say drilling opens up and the price of natural gas drops way down. the ratepayer may not get that lower price because we locked in at a higher price. And I think it's important that the ratepayer, if they're listening today, understands that could happen. Would you agree that that's a possibility?
Mr. President, Commissioner Pinocci, it's certainly possible that the price of energy could drop in a fashion that makes the hedge transactions entered into higher ultimate price than what the future price of energy may be. I would note, however, to the premise that this is gambling, I do believe that Northwestern would disagree with that. I'm not even sure that MCC would necessarily agree, but I don't want to put words in their mouths. I think that it's important to remember that the program as designed is designed to be more like an insurance project rather than speculation on the possible future price of energy. It's designed to insure against the sort of price volatility that Vice President Johnson mentioned in his opening remarks, rather than to earn returns, rather than to make money off of these transactions. And that's reflected in the commission's draft order here, or at least the draft order recommended by staff, because the commission in paragraph 31 states that it requires the hedging program to be used only to mitigate price volatility, as opposed to speculating on possible future movements in the energy market.
Mr. President, I'm trying to make sure a couple of questions are asked so that the ratepayer may say, hey, at least they were asked and we brought up another side. I myself might hedge or encourage it, but I think we got to go through a couple of questions. Tell me about this 90-10. And would it be better for the ratepayer if it was 80-20?
Mr. President, Commissioner Pinocci, the 90-10 is the cost sharing ratio that's established in the PCAM. So 90% of the over under collection relative to the PCAM base collections is borne by Northwestern's customers. 10% is borne by Northwestern shareholders. So the 90-10 is what Northwestern cites in this particular docket as evidence that they have skin in the game, that the relative gains or losses, and it's important to remember that we're looking at this as potentially an insurance product, so we would expect in general there to be a cost rather than a return on this program. But 10% of that is borne by the shareholders of Northwestern Energy rather than 100% being borne by utility customers. It is true to your premise, to your question, that if the cost sharing ratio was higher in favor of shareholders, if it moved from 10 to 20, that would tend to benefit customers more in periods when the costs exceed any sort of return on the hedging program. But it would also mean the opposite in the case of situations where there is actually a return. Shareholders would get to take more of that rather than the customers. But again, I would hazard to suggest that this is designed to generate returns. This is really designed to generate safety in case of market price volatility. And I see that Neil from regulatory jumped up here. So if you don't mind, Mr. President, I'll pass it over to Neil to answer that question as well.
Mr. President, Mr. Vice President. I believe that the 90-10 sharing ratio is in statute, and that's the province of the legislature, not the province of the Public Service Commission. If we're going to have sharing at all, I believe it has to be 90-10. So there's really no opportunity at this point, unless the legislature makes a change, that we could even go to 80-20. And regarding the gambling, from an economic standpoint, anytime you're involved in a, as Mr. Vice President was saying, in a commodity market, there's some risk. And you can pick your poison. I mean, either you take the opportunity to capitalize on high prices and the risk that they'll be low if you're selling, or you can fix the price. And so it's always kind of a gamble in the sense that you're making one choice or another. And it was staff's belief in this instance that due to the current volatility and for a long period, since I've been here, the prices have been stable and even falling. And Northwestern lost a lot of money on their hedges, or I should say their customers. They were out of market. But now we're in a different kind of market and prices seem to be at least stable or maybe increasing. And we've got resource shortage. I mean, where we have the decommissioning or retirement of coal plants and other resources, and the prices are probably going to be, or are likely to be even more unstable going forward. And so it's staff's position here that when you're making your choice, that you fix the price in certain cases, or at least part of the price, part of your supply that you need. Thank you.
Follow up, Mr. President.
Follow up, Commissioner Panucci.
Thank you for that answer. If the ratepayer comes to me and says, Panucci, you should have negotiated or try to put us in a better position, I'll point my finger at the legislature and tell them to start there. And it's good to know that. It's good to discuss this because if those are listening, they'll know that these questions were asked. And, we do look at risk and we do look at this as gambling. I'm going to support the motion because I believe prices are going to increase. And I believe I support Northwestern to hedge. But if I thought that drilling was going to increase, or I knew that it was, I'd have caution. And I don't want to have myself in the position where the ratepayer says, wow, you didn't even bring up some questions. So that's what I'm trying to accomplish here. Thank you for your answers, gentlemen.
Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Panucci, I'd make one final comment, and that is, yes, prices are going to change. They're becoming more volatile, and I think the markets may be increasing, and the counterparties are going to take that into mind. And so you may not get as good a deal as you thought you were going to get, because there's always a counterparty to take the hedge. But we believe with the sideboards in place and the monitoring and the rest, that we will be able to kind of follow this and see, or at least be able to monitor and evaluate whether Northwestern is making good decisions. So you will have an opportunity going forward to evaluate the quality of their hedging program. So the ratepayer is not being left adrift. The commission will have supervision over these programs to some degree.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
No comments.
Very good. All right, Mr. Hamilton, just some clarification questions, if I will. So we have a proposed order in front of us, and as I understand it, we're tackling essentially three distinct matters. So I'd like to walk through those with you. So Northwestern has asked for a true-up adjustment, correct? And it's my understanding that that portion of Northwestern's request is unopposed. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and then we are also acting on Northwestern's request for approval of its DSM forecast, correct?
That is correct.
Could you talk a little bit more about that, as we haven't touched on that piece yet?
Certainly. I'll say initially here that the MCC opposed the level of the forecasted DSM expenditures. The draft final order in the findings of fact discusses the rationale for the commission to approve Northwestern's forecasted DSM. Give me a moment here. I'll find that exact paragraph. Yes, I believe it's paragraph 18 on pages 4 and 5 of the draft final order. If I may, Mr. President, I would defer to regulatory to talk more about the basis for the forecast.
Sure. Mr. Fink, did you want to touch on that, please?
President Brown, in the application, Northwestern proposed an amount of just over 11 million, and MCC opposed that amount, saying that Northwestern hasn't exceeded or met that amount in the last I believe it's 4 years, or sorry, in the last 4 years. And then going forward, find it here. Believe there was an error in one of the testimony that was filed, but Northwestern supported its evidence that it did meet the forecasted DSM cost, all except for the COVID years. I believe it was in 20 and 21. And so that was the main basis for Northwestern's expenses for forecasting the 11 million.
All right, Mr. Fink, that touched on what I was hoping you would touch on. So as I understand it, the only 2 years Northwestern has not exceeded forecasted costs were the 2 years of what we would call the COVID-19 pandemic, not saying we're out of the pandemic at this point, but for the last 2 years, essentially.
President Brown, that's correct.
Okay. And then the third piece, Mr. Hamilton, of course, would be the request for approval of the off-system hedging program.
That's correct.
Okay, so I'm going to touch, I'm going to support staff's recommendation as to the first two issues. I'm going to express my concern about the off-system hedging program. This is not, my comments should not be taken as a disapproval of the concept of hedging or Northwest Energy's interest in moving forward with a hedging program. I understand the economic reasons why they're coming to the commission and making this request. My concern is that the application that was filed on this portion of Northwestern's request was, frankly, I thought quite vague and didn't really propose any kind of sideboards or fencing on the program. To that extent, we held a hearing in this matter wherein we took testimony that was elicited from the Montana Consumer Council and Northwest Energy. I must confess that I found the testimony of Dr. Dismukes to be quite persuasive. As you'll recall, during Mr. Dismukes' testimony, he asserted that the company failed to properly explain what was going to be the fundamental guidance for the program, what instruments were going to be used, what caps would be placed on the program for volumes, as well as on the dollar amount. Now, I appreciate that Northwest Energy, since the time of that hearing, has come forth and basically given us a proposed order that establishes some of the ring fencing provisions. I appreciate that. I think it made up for some of the clear deficiencies in the original application in this matter, but I must confess I still have concern about what is being proposed here because I find it somewhat vague, perhaps. I do appreciate the great work that was done by Commissioners Fielder and Johnson in trying to get some of the markers, if you will, that we can use to evaluate the success of this program, which are set forth in paragraph 32 of the program. But I'm still concerned that we as the commission had to take it upon ourselves to do a bit of work to basically set the boundaries and measures and criteria for this program. So I will be dissenting from that portion of today's order involving the off-system hedging program and intend to write a separate dissent. Additional discussion. All right. Seeing no additional discussion, all those in favor of the Vice President's motion signify by saying aye.
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 All right, and all those opposed signify by saying no. I'm a no on a portion of the order. All right, motion carries 4-1. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. All right. Let's move to work session item number 4, which is docket 2021.09.118. This is commission initiated purple rulemaking. We're here to consider beginning formal rulemaking regarding the commission's purple rules. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you again, Mr. President and Commissioners. This particular work session has been deferred a couple of times, so the meeting materials as originally circulated were dated from about a month ago. Since then, staff has continued to review and revise the formal notice of public hearing and proposed adoption on our purple rules. You may recall from our prior discussions about this process that we have 10 purple rules that are out of date in a variety of different ways. So the draft notice of public hearing and proposed amendment of the rules not only updates the existing 10 rules, but also proposes 2 additional new rules. I apologize, I guess, that the draft notice of adoption was not circulated until yesterday, but it has been posted to Eddie and made available to the public, and hopefully it arrived in all of your inboxes yesterday for review. I'll touch briefly on the proposed 2 new rules since they are new concepts. And then I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have about the remaining 10 that are being amended and revised. First, the new rule number 1 moves the incorporation of the federal rules, FERC's rules implementing PURPA, into its own standalone rule. Currently, that incorporation statement is included in 2 of the commission's proposed current rules. And as a result, to update federal rules or to update our rules to reflect federal rules, we have to update that incorporation in 2 places. New rule 1, I believe, is relatively uncontroversial and should allow us to make easier amendments in the future to incorporate FERC regulations. New rule number 2 establishes a voluntary mediation program. This was an idea proposed by the QF community that would hopefully limit the scope of what our contested case proceedings become, by allowing the parties to come to the commission before filing a petition and seek mediation to resolve some of the contract terms and other disputes that may be involved in negotiating a PPA. It's admittedly a difficult needle to thread to find the right sort of mediator and to have a process in place that makes sense to both of the parties such that they would voluntarily use this process, because again, the commission cannot require the parties to engage in mediation before filing a petition. But I do hope that this becomes a tool that parties can use in the future in order to narrow the scope of what have become a very difficult to manage set of PURPA dockets that this commission has on its plate. The remainder of the notice discusses all of the other 10 rules the commission already has in place and the revisions involved. Since we have previously had some work sessions on this, I won't delve deeply into all of those changes, but I would like to note 2 before I move on here. First is that in the definitions section, we have generally removed the verbatim repetition of federal definitions, instead preferring to refer out to the specific federal rule where that definition can be found. But in the interest of transparency and providing a clear path for folks who look at this rule to find those definitions, the notice of amendment and adoption proposes a new section 2, which has not previously appeared in the drafts circulated. And that new section 2 provides a direct link to where the official version of the Code of Federal Regulations can be found. So hopefully that is a quality of life improvement for the people who need to use these rules, and they can find those specific sections more quickly. I'd also like to call the commission's attention to section, the rule amendment in 38.5.1904, which begins on page 8 of the draft notice. In particular, section 2C has been amended to instead of referring to a special or additional interconnection facilities, including control and protected devices, time of delivery meeting, reinforcement of the utility system, all of these different obligations that a qualifying facility would have to pay for as part of their relationship with the utility. Instead of including all of those specific elements, the draft notice proposes to simply require the qualifying facility to pay for interconnection costs as those are defined in the federal rule. This, I believe, I would suggest is a reasonable response to the recent CED Wheatland Teton Pond Array decision from the Montana Supreme Court, which interpreted that definition of interconnection costs and gave us some additional guidance on how we should be applying that here at the commission. And so to the extent any element of that former rule imposed requirements that deviate from that interpretation of interconnection costs, I would propose it's appropriate for the commission to instead refocus on interconnection costs and rely on that definition as the hallmark for the obligations of qualifying facilities to the utility. There are two versions of the notice in your meeting materials, hopefully. One of those has a version of 38.5.1905, which concerns the purchase rate for QF Energy. That first version of 1905 preserves two options for the avoided cost of energy. One is a variable at time of delivery option of calculating the avoided cost of energy. And the second option is our traditional fixed avoided cost of energy, which is based on forecasts as of the date of the legally enforceable obligation. In addition to that version of 1905, at the request of a commissioner, we have prepared a second version. That second version of 1905 provides only one option for the avoided cost of energy, and that is the variable at time of delivery calculation. You'll recall that Northwestern Energy requested only the variable avoided cost of energy as part of their petition for rulemaking. And so that version of the notice, I think it's safe to say, more closely follows Northwestern's request of the commission, which is inspired, I think, by a desire to limit the number of disputes we have about the avoided cost of energy, which are considerable in our current processes. So with that brief introduction, I note that Neil from Regulatory here is available to answer any questions as well. And I would be, of course, happy to answer any questions you may have.
Neil, anything to add?
Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, I would add considerable, to put it mildly.
So before we go to a motion, I just want to have a short colloquy about where we are procedurally at this moment. It's my understanding that commission staff has come forward with a recommendation, correct?
That is correct, Mr. President. The staff's recommendation is to have the dual option 1905, so both fixed at the time of the LEO and the variable at time of delivery.
Very good, but it's my understanding we have a second possible proposed rule as well.
That is correct, Mr. President. Again, as I mentioned, at the request of a commissioner and out of the necessity of our timelines here. Today is a filing deadline for the Montana Administrative Register. And you'll recall from our previous work session, we have an October 1 moratorium on adoption notices. So today at noon would be the last possible time for the commission to file a proposal notice for rulemaking and still complete the rulemaking process before that October 1 moratorium kicks in.
Very good. Vice President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I will offer a motion. If there's a second, would ask for an opportunity to briefly comment, and I would move that we adopt proposed draft rule version number 2, which offers only variable pricing and does not include the option for fixed pricing within the purchase contracts, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for that clarification. Is there a second?
I will second.
All right. We have a motion and second. Vice President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The genesis for this option of moving to variable price at time of delivery comes from a change of policy at FERC. I want to point out that I have worked over time very closely with different FERC commissioners. I will tell you that FERC is generally speaking very deliberative, that when it comes to policy changes, they generally approach those with something that resembles glacial pace. The fact that FERC is providing this policy option to the states, I think is notable. I will tell you that FERC feels the same way that we do in this regard. We've said in this commission over and over again, we do not want to be utility managers. FERC does not want to become a state regulator. Therefore, they provide to us an option that they fully anticipate many of the states to use. If we look at our internal analysis of fixed pricing in these dockets, there is, I think, indisputable evidence that we have been missing the mark over and over again. There's commentary in the issuance of the FERC rule that indicates, frankly, the same thing. I would stress that this is simply the beginning of the rulemaking process. There will be ample opportunity for those who feel that the fixed price approach is still justifiable to make their case through the course of this proceeding. But I am absolutely convinced that moving to the variable cost at time of delivery pricing structure is frankly in the best interest of the ratepayers, the best interest of this commission, and I think ultimately it will prove to be in the best interest of both the utilities and the developers of these QFs. So I feel very strongly that we should move forward with the single option approach rather than the dual option, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Additional discussion? Additional discussion? I very much appreciate the Vice President's comments on this matter and frankly, his interest and work on this matter over the years. I'm pleased that we are moving forward with the PURPA rulemaking. Frankly, I wish we would have moved forward with this in a more expedited pace, but here we are. I would just note that I'll be supporting the Vice President's motion, but I would say that I would have been okay with moving forward with staff recommendation as well, just so that we would have full discussion about which method the commission should choose to move forward with. But as the Vice President has correctly moved out, we are very early in this proceeding, and so there will be plenty of opportunity for parties to talk about which method of calculation should ultimately be chosen. We're early in this process, and the commission has not made a final decision at this point in time. Additional discussion?
Yes, Mr. President.
Commissioner Fielder.
I just would like to note that the staff recommendation, and I believe Vice President's motion, would authorize staff to make edits recommended by the Secretary of State. And I presume that would mean non-substantive edits, not substantive edits.
Commissioner Fielder, you're getting a lot of head nods from staff in the room, so I think we're in concurrence with that position.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. President, I would just note, yes, Commissioner Fielder, you're 100% correct. These would be non-substantive edits. Staff has already identified a number of typos in the draft notice. For example, modal versus model in Rule 1910. It's an obvious error, one that Word doesn't automatically catch. So we will be correcting some of those typographical errors as we go through this and communicate with the Secretary of State's office, but they would be non-substantive only.
Follow up, Commissioner Fielder.
No, thank you, Mr. President. I think we should probably just note that in future staff recommendations, just add the words non-substantive in there so that we are sure and clear that we're not going to see some kind of alterations that are substantive.
Very good. Additional discussion? Okay, so before we move to vote, I just want to make sure what we're voting on, or to make clear to the commissioners. So what we're voting on is the version of the proposed rulemaking that would require the use of time of delivery as the method, correct? Very good. Okay, we'll just do voice vote on this one. All those in favor of the vice president's motion signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed signify by saying no. I think Commissioner O'Donnell voted, so motion carries unanimously. All right, and then for our final work session item of the morning, this would be docket 2021.12.138. This is Montana Dakota Utilities. This is to consider MDU's application for an accounting order. We're here to consider a draft final order. Brooke?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, President Brown and Commissioners. On December 9th, 2021, Montana Dakota Utilities filed an application for authority for deferred accounting for expenses associated with the investigation and remediation of a former manufactured gas plant in Missoula, Montana. MDU acquired the Missoula MGP site by merger in 1940 with Missoula Gas and Coke Company. The MGP, however, was not in use at this time, and the production and distribution of butane air gas was occurring on the property. In 1951, MDU sold the MGP site and butane production to Montana Power Company. Today, neither MDU nor Northwestern own the MGP site, and it is split into various lots and owned by private parties. In 2020, MDU entered into an agreement with Northwestern for the cleanup of the site. MDU is leading the cleanup under the Voluntary Cleanup and Remediation Act in consultation with the Montana DEQ. Although MDU asserts it was not responsible for the contaminations, it may still be liable under law under the Montana Comprehensive Environmental Cleanup Act due to prior ownership. MDU's share of investigation and remediation costs in 2022 are expected to be $549,000 and $994,000 respectively. Since data responses, MDU has received $398,000 in insurance proceeds. The Commission's authority to approve or deny accounting orders derives from its authority to prescribe the uniform system of accounts. An accounting order allows expenses to be deferred and considered in future rate-making proceeding. Historically, the Commission has evaluated accounting orders on 4 criteria: whether the amount is material, unplanned, beyond utilities management control, and whether the problem is unusual, abnormal, and unlikely to be repeated. Following data responses to the Montana Consumer Council and the Commission staff, the MCC filed intervenor testimony regarding the use of a 5th test by the Commission. The 5th test was to determine probability, which was used in a prior Northwestern docket in 2020. Northwestern in this docket requested authorization to record a regulatory asset. Under US of A and GAAP, a utility may only record a regulatory asset for it being probable that such expenses will be included in future rates. So following a procedural, the MCC asserts GAAP does not control rate making, and it is not necessary for the Commission to determine probability in any docket, any accounting order docket. And MCC questions how the Commission would remain impartial after previously determining probability, and MCC is also concerned about having sufficient evidence to determine probability when that evidence is normally found in a rate case. So following a procedural discussion between Commission staff, MCC, and MDU, MDU filed a status update and request for relief. MDU asserts the MCC and MDU agree to use a 4-point test and to not determine probability in this case. However, if the Commission does decide to use probability, they argue additional process will be necessary. Furthermore, MDU states it satisfies all 4 parts of the test, as the costs are material, the potential liability occurred prior to MDU's acquisition of the site, the environmental laws were not in place at the time, and MDU has only cleaned up 2 other MGP sites. Staff agrees that the 4-point test should be applied in this docket, as MDU applied for approval of deferment of costs and not necessarily the booking of a regulatory asset. Staff finds the materiality test is satisfied, as total investigation and remediation costs are 11.4% of total Montana operations net income. Staff finds the clean is unplanned and beyond utilities management control, as MDU did not cause the contamination, and the Comprehensive Environmental Cleanup and Responsibility Act was not put in place until 1985. Regarding whether the problem is unusual, abnormal, and unlikely to be repeated, MDU has 1 other MGP site in Montana. In 2014, the commission approved deferred accounting for the site and billings. MDU is not aware of any other MGP sites in Montana that would affect Montana ratepayers. Staff recommends approving the application and draft final order for deferred accounting treatment of costs associated with the Missoula MGP site. And I'd like to note an order granting deferred accounting does not affect rates, and nor does it guarantee rate recovery in a future rate case. A staff memo and draft final order regarding this was distributed prior to the work session, and Lucas Hamilton and I are available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Umstead. Mr. Hamilton, anything? Waving off. All right. Commissioner Fielder.
Yes, Mr. President, I move approval of MDU's application for deferred accounting treatment of costs associated with the investigation and remediation of the Missoula MGP site.
We'll second that motion. Discussion, Commissioner Fielder.
Mr. President, I think Brooke did an excellent job of presenting the information. The staff memo on this is very good. So I don't think I have anything to add.
Thank you, Commissioner Fielder. Additional discussion, questions? I'd just like to highlight or elucidate 2 points that you made, Ms. Umstead. One is that, again, as you stated, approval for the recovery and allocation of the costs related to this matter will be presumably sought in a future rate case, correct? And then the second thing is we do have some precedent on what we're doing here today because of the Billings MGP site. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Commissioner Fielder's motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. You're lagging today, Commissioner O'Donnell. All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Umstead. Okay, just some housekeeping matters here. Just an announcement that we will not be having a commission business meeting next Tuesday, August 2nd. So for those that regularly appear before the commission, some good news for you there. We will be having a hearing shortly in docket 2022.04.051, which is in the matter of Sleepy Hollow Oil and Gas. It will take our staff about 15 minutes to turn over and get ready for the hearing portion of today's meetings. And so with that said, I'll adjourn the business meeting and then we'll convene. Why don't we just make it about 9:15 a.m. and then we'll get started on our hearing. This meeting is adjourned.